Really cool. All right. Well, like Stephanie said, welcome to this program as part of our Salina Reads series. I'm sure most of you know what you are here for, but just to recap, we have the pleasure of having with us a park ranger from Fort Smith National Historic Site in Arkansas, Cody Faber. He is self-proclaimed expert on True Grit, loves it. I didn't mean any offense by that, just yeah. Yeah, if you have the official title, I will absolutely correct that. But yeah, so he is a park ranger and he knows a lot about the history of True Grit, and he is going to give us a little rundown on the historical aspects of True Grit this evening. So with that, I will just go ahead and hand it over to you, Cody, to get started.
Awesome. I'd like to think I'm an expert on it. I've certainly told the story enough times, and I'll skip over here in a minute and tell you about why I, as a kid, really enjoying the movie got me in some trouble. Almost got me hurt. Got me bucked off my horse the first time. I'll explain that here in a minute. It'll be a good, funny little story. But anyway, thank you guys first off for having me. I appreciate y'all reaching out and getting a hold of me for this talk. This is one of my favorite subjects. So, like you said, I'm a park ranger at Fort Smith National Historic Site. This is year 17 for me there, working with the National Park Service. I think that this movie and the book and John Wayne is probably one of the main reasons I even got into history as a kid to begin with. I grew up on a little ranch, a little cattle ranch down in just south of Fort Smith, Arkansas, where we raise cattle and horses. And so, the first time I watched this movie, I was blown away. I think every little kid, if you probably dreamed of charging across a meadow, firing two guns at the same time and getting away with it and beating the bad guys. I mean, there's some great redemption stories in this. I love True Grit overall. It's a wonderful example of well-written Americana when it comes to the book, and what some good kind of new Old South can do as far as the reading ability. I mentioned this a minute ago. Charles Portis, being from Arkansas, his jokes, his dry humor, how he kind of talks and kind of paces things. It sounds like I'm just hanging out with my grandpa. How he kind of talks about certain things. So I appreciate that greatly. And like I said, I love the book, love the movies. We mentioned before that maybe afterwards we can debate which ones were better. I'm always going to be a John Wayne fan because it's John Wayne. But the second one was really well done, and the book I think is better than both. And I think it really captured a lot of the focus that people really enjoy about both. They enjoy about both the movies. But anyways, with that said, please feel free to ask me questions when I share my screen here in a second. I'm not 100% sure if I can see you. Maybe I can, but if I can't, and you hold your hand up and I don't answer, don't call on you, just shout it out and I will hear you, and then I will talk to you. You don't have to wait till the end of the program to ask me questions. If you want to, that's great too. But if you want to ask me something during the middle of the program, I'll try not to be too much of the talking head, and you guys can just talk to me anytime you want. Okay. And if you need to go bathroom breaks or anything else, you're not going to hurt my feelings. You guys go do anything you like. And like I said, I'm just tickled pink that you guys had me in. So let me share my screen here just real quick. And let me jump down here. I got to find it just for a second, and I will get us back. There we go. Hang on just a second. Well, hang on just a moment. Let me figure out. Well, there he goes. There it is. It helps if I open it up first so the computer can say, hey, there's something else there. There we go. Now we're in it. Okay, can you see that? Okay, guys?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So like I said, this is always one of my favorite books. It's an excellent read on what is really happening following the American Civil War with the crime, the issues inside of Indian Territory. And one of the things, and I'll jump over here first, before I get into the history of it, there's my awesome picture. And you can tell I'm an excellent editor when it comes to putting my face on John Wayne over there. when I was a kid, and I mean little kid, I always wanted to learn how to twirl a Winchester rifle on a horse. And so I did. And I had my old horse I named Cincinnati, this little Appaloosa gelding that I had as a kid. And I thought, he's a pretty easygoing horse. I bet I can shoot off of him. And I remember going and getting my little Henry 22 that had a large loop, just like John Wayne's. I learned how to twirl it before then. And I was like, I think I'm going to shoot it off this horse. And I did. And that was the first time I ever got hard bucked off a horse. The old saying goes, you can shoot off any horse once. And that was the case for me. So when I was a little kid, that got me into a lot of trouble. I remember reading and watching this since I was a little kid. And, it was always a big part of my life growing up. And I never thought that how blessed I would be is that I get to sit now on the other side of the desk at the visitor center and answer questions about this story and kind of flesh out what's true and what's not true to people. I would imagine most of you have probably seen the movies. I hope that you've read the book as part of the read. Like I said, they're both excellent. There's a lot of fact in this that Charles Portis did. There's a lot of fiction in it as well, where he had the ability to kind of stretch stories and do that. So we'll kind of jump into that. I've gotten better since then. I've gotten horses I can shoot guns off of since then. So I don't get bucked off my horse anymore, which is nice. But let's go ahead and set the stage here. Again, the idea here that we have, you've got Rooster Cogburn, which is a made-up book character. I'll divvy into that here in just a moment. But you've got Rooster Cogburn, but you've also got some real deputy marshals that more than likely Charles Portis would have read about when he wrote this book. You've got fake outlaws like Lucky Ned Pepper and Tom Cheney, but you've also got real outlaws that they would have been based off of that would have been pretty rough and meaningful as well, that I think are worth noting. The people they do hit on that are real, like Judge Parker, you have that. You have a setting set in Indian Territory, and all the issues that go on with that, following the Trail of Tears and then following the Civil War, and then the place where they have them at is real, and the women that at the time are very real. However, Maddie Ross is also a made-up book character, but the women that Portis would have written her about, perhaps tough ladies at the time, are definitely worth mentioning and worth including in this story that you can't skip over. And because one thing that I was shocked by when I first read the book was that Rooster Cogburn, John Wayne, is not the main character. He is part of the cast, but it's Maddie is the narrator. Maddie's the focus of the story. It was one of the ladies, which is kind of neat. That you have that perspective at the end of the 19th century here being told from her perspective. So again, this kind of setting, I'm going to skip over one more here. So one thing that I enjoy about this is the historical context of Fort Smith and the Indian Territory. When they made the movie, and I'll kind of include this at the very ending of our thoughts here tonight, but when they made the movie, the director and them said, hey, we're going to shoot this and where we want. This is going to be a big sky kind of Western. And they ended up filming it mostly in the first movie anyway in Colorado and parts of Idaho. Now, the second movie, they filmed parts of New Mexico and Texas. So a little closer to home. But the fact that they filmed it, again, he just thought it didn't matter. But when Charles Portis wrote this, the context of Fort Smith was real. The context of Indian Territory and what they're following up on was real. So let's skip over that. I'm going to go give you a brief rundown, very brief, of Fort Smith history to kind of set the stage. It's not just like Rooster Cogburn is not just living in this little Chinese grocery store in some random Western town on the edge of a quote unquote lawless land, which really wasn't true either. Of Indian Territory. So let me let's set the stage for what's going on in Indian Territory and western part of Arkansas, especially around Fort Smith. So Fort Smith's first story really starts
real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure your PowerPoint is keeping up with you. Oh. We are seeing the first slide still, and it's in like the basic outline. It's not in the slideshow mode.
Interesting. Hang on, I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me that. Tell me if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes, we've got it. It's still in the editing mode instead of the slideshow, but we can see it.
Okay. Huh. Well, I don't know how to fix that, I'm afraid. Man. Okay, but you can see, can you see? I may have to just cut in and out. Are you able to see the historical context of Fort Smith Indian Territory?
Yes, we can see that now.
Okay. I'm not sure what's going on there. Huh. Let me skip to the next slide. Can you see anything on the next one?
Nope, it didn't go with you.
Oh man. Okay, let me close this out for just a second. I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me see if I can start it over. I can see you guys again. Hi everybody. Let's see here. Let me see.
Am I the only person here that hasn't seen the movies? It's been years if I have. I haven't seen either of them.
Okay, can you see any of my slideshow now?
It is still in that editing mode, but it's following along the slides.
Okay, well, I may just have to cut in and out of it, guys. I'm not sure what the deal is there. My apologies. Can you see the slides okay? Like, if I'm able to pull them up, can you still see them?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see them all right.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure what's going on there. Because I see the whole page on my end. Okay. So the context here, our story at Fort Smith really starts in 1817, mainly with you have the U.S. Rifle Regiment being sent, the guys in the kind of green coats there. That little bottom picture was the only painting done of the first fort site when it was actually being built. But the main reason they're there is to keep the peace between the Osage and the Cherokee. So there was a massive war taking place between the tribes when the Cherokee started arriving in the late 1700s, 1760s, 70s. By about 1817, you're looking at about 5,000 Cherokee inside of what's western Arkansas and eastern Indian Territory, or what's going to be Oklahoma. And then you have, depending on the area, anywhere between 5 to 15,000 Osage in the surrounding kind of statewide region. And well, the quad state area, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas. They were the dominant tribe in this region of the country. So as those two tribes are fighting, the U.S. government is sent here to keep the peace, mainly because they're afraid that that fighting is going to spill back over into Arkansas. And then that is going to cause some serious issues. And they're also realize that this is a war zone, that their other tribes aren't want to move here. So they stayed there till 1824. They never fire a shot in anger. They abandon that fort. They go build Fort Gibson over in Oklahoma in 1824. And then 1830, though, you had the Indian Removal Act. Now I'm going to skip to the next one here. And I guess we're just going to do this one at a time. So just bear with me here, guys.
Is this the Boogle Club? Is this the true crime?
No.
No? Sorry, guys.
Can you see the next slide there?
Yes, it moved with
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry if I have to just click between them. I apologize. I'll try to be as quick as I can about it. But so who we lovingly put on our $20 bill, Andrew Jackson, of course, causes the forced removal process that we typically call the Trail Tears. There's different names for different tribes. But as that's going on and moving into Indian Territory, the U.S. military is concerned that there's going to be more fighting, more issues with that, and they want to build a new fort somewhere along the area, and the site for the second Fort Smith is chosen. And so that really that takes off from 1830. The removal process continues for the next 2 decades. Each tribe has their own story. Each tribe has their own difficulties and successes as well. And what's really neat about this, and I think is worth noting, is sadly, some people will talk about the history of these tribes like they're all past. Well, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Muskogee Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, they're all here. They all survived this removal process. And so that's who, imagine them surviving all the things that's going to happen to them on the trip. They get to Indian Territory, and now they're rebuilding. And that's going to kind of get them to the Civil War, and we'll kind of cut back out and come back to them here in a second. Now, the second Fort Smith is going to be rebuilt. Well, it helps if I get the right slide there, don't it? There we go. So the second Fort Smith is going to be built starting around 1838. And it was a massive military garrison compared to the wooden stockade it was replacing just a few hundred yards away. The second Fort Smith is going to be gigantic, closer to a coastal defense fort than what it really was, which was an inland supply depot anywhere from a 6 to 12-foot rock wall. It was finished mostly just in time in 1846 for the Mexican War, where it was a major jumping off point for troops headed west and south to go to the Mexican War. And then when the war was won by the United States, all these new areas are opened up, including California, and Fort Smith then acted as a major jumping off point for the California Gold Rush. And a lot of explorers went out of here at the time too. So Fort Smith can be kind of a big route west for a lot of different people. Now, all that's good for the town. However, things are going to change rapidly inside of Indian Territory when it comes to the Civil War. So that's a lot of the story of True Grit, is the Civil War usage and how that affected the men and the women that were there in the region of the country. So in 1861, Fort Smith is a Union garrison. It is manned by a couple of companies of U.S. cavalry, and it very quickly, Fort Sumter is fired upon April 12th. Less than a week later, or 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks later, Confederate militia from Little Rock is going to come up the river. They're going to capture Fort Smith, and they're going to hold it for the next 2 years. And then in 1863, it's going to swap back into Union hands and remain that way for the rest of the war. Now, that's bad enough in western Arkansas as armies are piling forth, back and forth. Guerrilla warfare is involved in the region. Quantrill and all his men. So arguably, if Brewster Cogburn was a real character, he might have been down here during the war, if you want to consider it that. But that style of hard fighting, not just soldiers lined up in lines in major battlefields, but very tit-for-tat, guerrilla style warfare, which is the worst because that's going to ruin economies. That's going to ruin the social setting. Then keep in mind that the tribes have survived the Trail of Tears. They're in the process of rebuilding, and then they're asked to pick sides. The massive majority of them sides with the Confederacy. And the reason for that is because a lot of them had slaves, so they had a dog in that fight. And then when the U.S. military pulled out, they had no one else to side with. There was even quotes later where they were like, what were we supposed to do? You know, like you left us and we had to sign with this army that showed up at our doorstep and fight for the Confederacy. And a lot of them did. And so at the end of the war, they're going to be punished for this. They're going to have annual annuities taken away. They're going to have land rerouted and so forth. So there's a lot going on there where there is a lot by 65 when the war ends. Indian Territory is a rough place to live. People are broke. People are economically and socially there's a lot of upheaval there, and they're trying to make their way, and a lot of people turn to crime. And so from 1865 to 1871, because our court system kind of takes off after that in 72, there's a lot of problems happening inside there, and things are not getting any better. I would argue that crime is only getting worse. And so that's kind of the setting you get to in there that kind of sets stage for... I'm just going to skip past this one slideshow and go to the next one. Just for a second. You can see that before I get done. So that's the kind of setting here that we're dealing with. So jump ahead to, in the book, it doesn't really state a set year. We believe it's probably around between 1875 and 1878. So about 10 to 12, 15 to 13 years following the conclusion of the Civil War. Crime is rampant. Indian Territory is a rough place to live. The tribes, however, do have their own police force. They do have their own court systems, but they're not able to keep up with the amount of crime, especially involves non-natives. And so, like, if I'm an American citizen and I steal someone's horse, the tribes can't do anything to me. So they're going to they can hold me, but they can't try me. And so therein kind of lies the problem. So now we have the setting. Fort Smith, this bustling western town inside of western Arkansas. Indian Territory is rife with crime, a lot of disorder, economic issues. And that's where the story kind of picks up with Mattie Ross's father, of course, being killed in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Now, I'm going to go ahead and ruin the entire story for you. Is everybody ready? Okay. If he was killed in Fort Smith, Arkansas, that's a state issue, which means that he never would have been tried in Judge Parker's court for a state matter. That's a federal court. Now, he might have been tried for lesser crimes inside Indian Territory, but he's not going to get tried for murder that happened in Arkansas. That's a state murder. That would have been held accountable by the state, not the federal authorities. So it ruins almost the entire premise to the entire book, and I apologize. But that's how it goes. So pick up here. Now Maddie Ross. And I love this picture. I'm not sure who made this. I wish I could find them and thank them for this. So let's talk about the ladies. Maddie Ross is a made-up book character. She's not true. However, she's based off some pretty great. I love this little thing there. Some of it might be kind of small to read, so I'll read some of it. Two long no-nonsense braids, a mild crush on the old, slightly alcoholic but utterly charming Rooster Cogburn, not pictured. Stockman's coat and hat, heart full of malice, soul bent on revenge, also not pictured. A Colt Dragoon revolver, frilly undershirt with high collar because you have had it up to here, stupid fat men, which is great. Perpetually narrowed eyes, fixated on hanging Tom Chaney out to dry, enviable eyebrows, and the last on the far right, left arm for now, because if you've read the book, she loses her left arm. So that was my favorite one. But even though yes, she's not real, but she's based off characters that we think of. I've had people like, well, the whole premise doesn't make sense. You've got a young lady running around in a territory. Would they be that tough? That's a crazy thought to have her running around, having to deal with in a very much risky, dangerous world. So do we have those kind of women at Fort Smith? You bet we do. So on the far left, you can see the picture of one of our reenactors. I don't have a photograph of one of our first ladies that we have here at Fort Smith is a laundress by the name of Susan Loving. And just to give you an idea how tough she was, they came with the first group of rifle regiment here. There's 4 female laundresses that came with all those 60 men. And in 1819, a couple years later, the first baby's born to Susan Loving, one of the laundresses. She married one of the sergeants in the fort. And ready for this, ladies. It recorded that was September of 1819 that the first baby was born in the fort, weighing a fine 12 pounds. 12 pounds. So I have 2 little girls, and both my girls were in the 6-pound range. I told my wife, what would you happen if you doubled the size of our daughters? And there's a reason that the leading cause of death for women at the time was childbirth. She's tougher than every guy at that entire fort. I guarantee it. 12-pound babies. Goodness. Another lady we know a lot about Fort Smith, that very central picture there, picture of the man, the child, and then the lady standing there. The lady on standing is Mary Rutherford Cravens. She was born, let me get the date right here. I almost forget. She's born in 1840. So she was 21 when the Civil War broke out. She is stationed there. She's living at the fort. She remembered growing up there. She remembered the parties. We know a lot about what Fort Smith was like during the Civil War and pre-Civil War because of her writings, her letters back and forth to her husband. They're seated. And here's what's funny is she's very pro-Confederate. Her husband there sitting was very pro-Union. And she said, hey, if you want to marry me, because they were engaged, you want to marry me, you better not sign up for the North. And he didn't. He signed up for the Confederacy and fought the rest of the war as Confederate. Love will make you do strange things. So he signed up for the Confederacy, fought the rest of the war, and she remembers life there at the fort. They talked about they were afraid they were going to get attacked, and she even talks about how all the women armed themselves and walked around with pistols, and they would go into the woods and practice, I kid you not, on targets of Abraham Lincoln's pictures that they would shoot. And then, so she goes through that. Her and her husband get married. And then she says it wasn't, 9 months later, he's off to war, and she gives birth to her first child, and it lives 2 months and passes away. So, she's at home by herself in the middle of a war. Her husband's gone to war, and she's just lost her first child. And she goes on, survives the war. They end up going to Texas when the Union comes back and takes the fort. And then when at the end of the war, she says that the husband comes back home, they've lost everything. All the money he's got is worth nothing because it's Confederate now. He said he had a $20 gold piece. But he also had a good team of mules and a good wagon and a strong right arm, which is arguably one of the manliest things I've ever heard of in my life. And she stays in Texas for a year. He goes back and gets the farm started. And then she comes and joins him. And it's that type of home that they build along with hundreds of others in the community and thousands, in our tri-state kind of quad state region here that rebuild this area and put it back together. And so she's, I think, a tough lady worth mentioning. The top right there is Anna Dawes. Her father was a senator. She actually visited the Fort Smith jail that if you remember in the movies with Rooster, he brings the prisoners down to the jail. Well, that jail was so bad that young lady wrote about that jail because that's a real jail. and they appropriated $50,000 to build an entire new wing to the jail in about 1890 to 96. She probably saved a lot of lives, never visited here, didn't benefit from it, but did some great things and actually changing a lot in Fort Smith. And the bottom right there, real quick, does anybody know who that is? I'd be very surprised if you did. How many of you have heard of Judge Isaac Parker? Okay, I can't see you, so you might say yes. Everybody, have you already heard of Judge Parker? Okay. That sadly enough, and I say sadly, that's his wife. And the reason I say sadly is people don't know her. That is Mary Parker. Her husband's Judge Parker, but she stands alone. She doesn't need her husband to make mention of her. She's the reason the Arkansas-Oklahoma State Fair gets started. She's the reason the Fort Smith Public Library is built. She's the reason that the first hospital is made in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which later became Sparks Hospital that my parents worked in, and then later now it's Baptist Health. But she changed the community while she was here, and so again, yes, Maddie Ross may be a made-up character, but the ladies that at the time, worth noting, amazingly tough ladies, and changed the world around them. Not just side characters. Like I said, you watch the movie and you might think John Wayne's the main character. He's not. Maddie Ross is. She's the real hero of this story. But we can go into that here in a bit too. All right, next one. One of the things that also I would say fact and fiction, I'm going to skip past my initial slide here, was the Fort Smith executions. Now, at Fort Smith, if you come there and see, that's the picture on the top there of the gallows. It was the 1886 model gallows, much larger, and with a wall around it. If you've seen the movie, and that kind of little picture on the other side there, set up as that kind of probably one of a smaller, earlier form of the gallows. But what's interesting about this picture here is you notice there's no wall. It was a very public affair. And the movie shows that. The book talks about it. That was wildly true. Early on, before the wall went up around the actual structure, you could watch the execution from beginning to end. They talk about it being a very carnival-like atmosphere. Children would come. People would sell snacks. They would put their blankets out and watch it. It was very much a kind of, like I said, like a carnival-like atmosphere. Judge Parker himself is the man who changed that. He ordered the white wall you can kind of see on the picture on the top there, put around it so you could actually see people standing on the gallows, but you couldn't see them drop. And this was a federal execution. Now, in the second movie, you remember if you've seen the second one, it has them talking and everybody gives their last words. And then you get to the guy who's obviously a Native American of some sort. And he says, like, he starts to talk and they put the black cap over him. They don't give him their final words. That is historically inaccurate. Every single one of these men had their last words taken down or recorded. This is not a lynch mob. This is a federal execution. And so there's some differences there. Also, the biggest difference, if you've seen the first movie, and you can't really see it in the picture, but if you watch the movie, you can see snow-capped mountains in the background. I don't know if any of you been to Northwest Arkansas, but there is no snow-capped mountains in Oklahoma and Northwest Arkansas. So we joke that erosion was just horrible on the 19th century and washed away all our snow-capped mountains. So it's Oklahoma and it's very flat over there. So there's that. You can kind of see, I'll show you another picture here. And you can kind of see the second movie's images of that compared to the bottom picture there that is a drawing. It was a photograph and they drew it out because the photograph was fading, but that is of a real execution. One of the last one, that is number 77 of 86 guys executed. That is the Cherokee Bill execution. But if you look at the top right one there, you can see again that this was again meant to be, this early on was a very public spectacle, never meant to be that way. It was a federal execution. It would have been closed off afterwards. But the movie early on does get that fairly accurate as far as, the big crowds and the people doing stuff and talking and the noise, which would be horrifying. We do have, like I said, 86 men that are executed at Fort Smith. No women. We do have 4 that are convicted of murder and were destined to be executed. That was mandatory at the time. But Judge Parker himself actually wrote letters of commutation and got him commuted to life in prison. So we only have men that are executed at Fort Smith. Jump to the next one here. And again, if I'm going back and forth, I apologize. I'll show you another picture of an execution that we know of that's taking place. The only image I know of that is actually taken during an execution. That is not a drawing, a photograph. This is taken from the 6th Street Courthouse, looking at what's going to be the jail and the building there in the center. If you come visit us now, you'll see our visitor center there, all our museum inside that large building there. But on the far left of the image, you can see on the far left, you can see where all those people are kind of standing on that rock wall on the far left, and that white little structure there, that is the gallows. And we believe, we're not exactly sure which execution this was, probably set between 1892 and 1893, because some of the buildings disappeared after that. It's set in winter. So again, we're down to like 2 or 3 executions, we think it is. But you can see they did not allow people inside the enclosure. But that's why the people, or if you notice on the rock wall, that's how people are watching. They're standing on the rock wall. They've come to see this execution, so they've piled themselves around. And that was extremely common. We have as few as 2 people show up for some of the hangings, and as many as 2,000. So the accuracy of those executions is pretty good by both the movie and the book standards. Another person I think that is worth noting, speaking of fact and fiction, is Judge Parker himself. We have a lot of Westerns. We loved the Westerns. If you watched the Clint Eastwood version of Hang 'em High, you get kind of that Clint Eastwood section of that. But here he is, surrounded by all the fact and fiction compared to what really happened. We call him the hanging judge. So here's a guy who was called that, nicknamed the hanging judge, but at the same time was against the death penalty. Now that surprises most people. At that time in American history, if you're convicted of murder or rape, it's a mandatory death sentence. The judge has absolutely no saying in the matter whatsoever. He was a judge before this. He'd been a congressman. He'd been a lawyer, and he'd also been a Union soldier. And so he was a lot of different things before he came to Fort Smith to get served here and serve the people here. A lot of people didn't like him when he first arrived. By the time he passed away in 1896, though, he was considered kind of almost a mythological person in his own right, even at the time. And this picture here, I'm gonna skip over here for my next slide. I would argue that the hanging judge mantra is not true, but Judge Parker is. Again, the picture on the left there of Judge Parker when he's young, he's actually 38 in that picture. That was his first year. So I'm 39. So he's a year below me. Now look at the picture to the right. Now I can hear you. Like I said, I can't see you. I can hear you. I'll take guesses. How old do you think he is in that photograph where he's got the white hair? Give me some guesses.
55. 36.
36. The white-haired picture, how old do you think he looks?
75.
75? Yeah. We asked school kids that. They're like 110, and he's not. He's probably around between 56 and 57 years old in that picture. He's dying of Bright's disease. That's kidney failure. So he is not doing well. So he goes from picture A to picture B there in 21 years. And he's wearing himself out. He's working 6 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day. He doesn't watch any of the executions, despite what the movie says about it. In the book, I love Charles Portis's book, but he made that part up where he watched from the building. That never happened. He never did any of that. That was all just book story. He actually would, in fact, every time they ever had an execution, the court system would be closed down for that day. Not only did he not watch the executions, he wasn't even on the property. So he was wildly against the death sentence. One of the things he had quoted that he was most famous for was saying, "I never hung a man, it was the law." And he's right. And he also said, too, that it's not about his argument against capital punishment was it's not about the severity of the punishment. It's about the certainty of it that counted. And so there were people who argue that. And so one thing about this is neat. We do get to bring up capital punishment issues with the book and with the site because, that's a hot button topic. Even now, people are still arguing about whether that's right or wrong. They did at the time. Parker himself argued about it and argued with the Supreme Court about it at times. So Judge Parker is very real, not maybe the hanging judge mantra. Another thing is the overall story of the federal court system here in jails. So at the top left there, you'll see Lucky Ned Pepper and his gang with Tom Chaney and the rest of his guys. how this works. And one thing that a lot of people don't think about is like, okay, you've got a crime. Well, how does that go through the system of actually ending up here? It's not like Rooster's just riding around and he hears about a crime and he goes arrest somebody. That's not how the U.S. Marshal Service worked at the time. So to do that, a crime had to have been committed. They had to have been reported. It would go back to the U.S. Marshal at the time. That's Crump there on the bottom left. That had to go back to a U.S. Marshal. The U.S. Marshal would have had to have issued a warrant for that arrest. That would go to a deputy like Rooster. Then they would be captured by a man like Rooster, brought back to the jail, and then seen their day in court. So it was not like this, they're just riding around looking for bad guys. That's simply not how this worked. There was a process to it. Again, this was a federal court system. So yeah, Rooster in the book could have gone after Lucky Ned and Cheney if they were in there. Again, couldn't have tried him for murder because the crime took place in Arkansas. But he could have tried him for some of the other things he could have done as well. So again, the idea that this court system's real. The book, yes, stretched, made up story, awesome. But the idea of what Portis is basing this off of is very real. Of what these guys were up against, the setting, the lawlessness, the problems, the jurisdiction issues, and what the court system was really dealing with was a real issue. Let me go to the next one here. You'll see a better image of the court here that Rooster and men like him at the late 1870s would have seen. And so that's our courthouse. Again, historically, it was the enlisted men's barracks. And when the court system moved in 1872, they turned the jail into the bottom, and the top portion became the actual courthouse and the courtroom. And so downstairs is where they would have taken all those prisoners. And we'll talk about the jails here in just a second. Let me skip to the next picture here. There we go. There you go. So here's some images, which I would argue that this is some of the best scenes in the entire book and the movie is the courtroom scenes. The picture that you see there on the top is taken from the 6th Street Courthouse down the road from us. It was used by Parker for just a few years. I think what they're trying to go for in the movie is early on the 70s, which they would have used in the building that we were in, the picture I just showed you. And it would have been more sparsely, decorated. The chairs and the items that would have been nearly as fancy as the picture you see in the top right. But some of the best scenes of the movie, the arguments between and the testimony of Rooster making jokes basically to the lawyers, which again, classic Arkansas dry humor. Like when you were backing away, which way were you going? And he's like, well, I'm backwards. I always go back when I'm backing away. Great lines, great humor in that. And he's like, well, when you sprang up on the Wharton gang, was your gun loaded and cocked? And he said, well, a gun that ain't loaded and cocked ain't good for nothing. And he's right. So a lot of good writing in the book on those subjects. But the back and forth that you see between some of those characters, again, common. We have records of guys where they're, making jokes in the seat and getting reprimanded by the judge for it, and the lawyers getting in trouble and reprimanded. And so that scene was pretty accurate. I thought the movie did an excellent scene on that, and so did the book. Portis did an excellent portion of that. So you can kind of see what the courtroom looked like. No, let's look at the jails downstairs, filled with an untold amount of different type of criminals. In the picture there, you can see probably Native Americans in the picture. The very top guy sitting on those steps outside the courthouse. If you look back, everybody I've ever talked to that's way more experts on different Western tribes say that he's Cheyenne. What in the world is a Cheyenne doing here in Fort Smith, Arkansas? I don't know. So the picture there in the bottom is the jail. If you remember when John Wayne and when Maddie Ross first sees him in the book too, he's taken prisoners down into the jail. And this is the jail they would have taken into. Large open room, nothing but beds on the floors filled with lice. You had two fireplaces that would have been rocked up, and that's where the bathing facilities would have been in, which is buckets of water. Hope you're first in line because they dump the water out at the end of every day. They talk about the water just being filthy. And the other buckets you can see in the picture, which were actually used as bathroom buckets. So that room alone, there was 2 big open rooms used by the soldiers for their mess hall. Now the jail, those 2 big open rooms, you had 50 to 100 full-grown men on each side using those rooms, using those bathrooms. You can imagine the smell in the jail. There was a reason they called this the hell on the border jail. It was rough. It was not good with hygiene. It was smelly. And the ceiling there, which has been restored, But at the ceiling at the time, in between the next floor, the courtroom right above it, they actually put sawdust in between the floors to keep the smell from going upstairs. That's how bad the smell was. So Portis did a good job on the book on that. There are things, it's fiction. We have some of the outlaws. Now, love the characters they picked for both movies in a lot of ways. I thought Josh Brolin did great on the second movie, kind of portraying them with his little powder mark under his skin, which would happen if you get shot too close like that. And then I thought, now I'm a hardcore Robert Duvall fan. I thought he did great. But my man there, Barry Pepper, playing Lucky Ned, was probably the best. He was phenomenal that scene. He looked like a dirty old rough outlaw on the trail. That was a rough guy. And so, yes, some of the characters like Cheney, Ned Pepper, yes, they're not true. Those people are made up book characters. However, the real outlaws at the time would have been definitely worth noting and people that I would not want to go up against. Now, this picture, the right picture with all the different images in there, this is a photograph of the first 6 guys executed under Judge Parker. We rarely have images of them. The guy on the left there in the kind of yellowed kind of image, that is John Childers. He was the first man executed at Fort Smith, not under Judge Parker. Judge Parker doesn't come till 75. This would take place in 1873. John Childers there is convicted of killing a man named Rayburn Wedding, who he claims was a Kansas man. It was one of the reasons he killed him. You ready for that? There you go. He was mad at Kansas. He was a guerrilla soldier from Missouri, and he was fighting inside Indian Territory mostly. And when he that image, it's kind of hard to tell, but if you zoom in, you can see what belt buckle he's wearing there. That is a Union NCO cavalry belt buckle. Where in the world a Confederate trooper got that, I don't know, but he kept it even after the war. He's convicted of murder. Excuse me, let me back up here. He's captured. He's actually taken this before the jails in Fort Smith. It's right across the river over in a town called Van Buren. And he escapes one night. He's caught some months later, but what's neat is who he escapes with. He escaped with 8 other men. One of them listed as W. Earp. Everybody knows Wyatt Earp, right? Well, Wyatt Earp was held in the Van Buren jail for stealing horses. And despite what the fun but historical inaccurate Kevin Costner movie talks about him, where his dad, rest in peace, old Gene Hackman, comes and bails him out of jail. Well, that's not what historically happened. We have no record of that. There was no bail process then, and he had been sent in the jail, and we have nothing of him tried. So where did Wyatt Earp go? He escapes the jail, and one of the guys who Wyatt Earp would escape with is that guy there in the yellow, which is John Childers. John Childers is recaptured. At that point, the jails moved back over to Fort Smith. He's tried for the murder of Rayburn Wedding, and he's convicted, and he's executed in August of 1873. So he's our first one. Our first under Judge Parker is those other guys on the right there. And I'm going to very briefly, top one, William Whittington killed his best friend for $100. Smoker Mankiller, the guy there to his left, or his right, our left. He was a Cherokee. He killed his neighbor after he borrowed a rifle, was drunk, and shot the neighbor with the rifle he borrowed from him. Samuel Fowey, the guy on the right there, he killed a traveling school teacher for $36 that the man was carrying at the time, and they got drunk and bragged about it and got caught. Guy there in the middle, Edmund Campbell, only African-American in the group. He actually killed his neighbor over an alleged insult with another man, and they killed the man and the woman that was living in the house at the time. Bottom left is James Moore. He was a known outlaw, and he shot a deputy who was in chase while they were trying to go after him, chase him, because he was an outlaw at the time. And then Daniel Evans, the bottom right, he was 19 years old in that picture, and he killed another 19-year-old boy for his horse's saddle and his boots, and then ends up keeping the boots and wearing them into the courtroom, and they are positively identified during the trial as murder evidence. Don't wear murder evidence into the courtroom. You'd think we wouldn't have to say that. Remember America's Dumbest Criminals? Remember that show? You could put Daniel Evans on that one. But those 6 guys, you notice they all kind of got matching kind of coats, and a couple of them have the bow ties on. That's because they were given change of clothes the day before they're executed. These are their burial clothes. So if they chose to, they'd be given their nice clothes, and that's what they'd be buried in. So this was taken probably within 24 hours of their execution. And so these are the first 6 under Judge Parker. And again, that's who people like Rooster and the real life people would have been. Lucky Ned Pepper, Cheney, bad guys. I would argue that the people in real life that people like Rooster would have gone up against would have been even worse. So, and one of my favorite stories, maybe in the book and the movies, the Snake Pit. You can't forget that. Did you know that was based off a real thing? That actually, something similar that actually happened. So in 1883, Martin Joseph, a young outlaw, was actually convicted of murder. And of the murder, he actually it was a husband and wife that he was working with, they were also outlaws. He killed both of them and dropped their bodies down this big kind of crevice and pit in the ground. And they got found out where it was. They went to go look for it, and they sent a deputy marshal who, is acting like a detective, basically, having to go in there and collect evidence. They sent him down. They sent the deputy marshal down there to go get the bones, the remains of the bodies. And he said when he got down in there into the cave, this is Deputy Marshal Mershon, by the way. They got down the cave. They said there was rattlesnakes that were wintering in there. And he had a lantern. And he said he went back, got a lantern, came back with his pistol. And he said in the newspaper, it said, commenced a war on the rattlesnakes. His first shot extinguished the lantern. So he's in the dark down there with a bunch of rattlesnakes, which I think is the most horrible thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. That's a horror movie. That's not a Western anymore. And so they ended up, they did get the bodies out and they presented it. And what's interesting about that trial is they didn't tell Martin Joseph, the accused, that they had found the bodies until they showed them at the trial, the bodies. And they actually brought in some of the bones and quick conviction of him. But that's what Portis based that little scene off of, the snake pit. And so again, the criminals in the movie and the book, scary bad guys. People in real life, worse. So that's who the real deputy marshals were up against. So let's go to the last one here as far as the outlaws go, and then I'll skip the next one. This is one of my favorite pictures in our entire collection that we have. The guy there you see in the center is named Cherokee Bill. He's believe it or not, he's 19 years old. He's about less than a month away from turning 20. He'd been wanted for murder. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can see their numbers on their hats there, are deputy marshals. He was captured by number 1 and number 2 to his left, our right. That's Ike Rogers. Ike. So if you want to hear some Kansas stuff, how many of you have heard of the first Kansas Colored Volunteer Infantry? Yeah.
Yes.
Ike was in it. Ike there, number 1, was one of the first guys to join with the first Kansas Colored. He would have fought at Island Mound from the first engagement all the way to the end of the war, would have helped capture Fort Smith back in 1863. And then in 1890, he becomes a deputy U.S. Marshal. And he helps capture arguably one of our greatest criminals in Indian Territory history there, Cherokee Bill. His real name's Crawford Goldsby. He's wanted for murder. Ike helps to capture him. He gets into the jail. He actually gets a gun smuggled into him and kills a guard. And then he gets tried for a second murder. 13 days later, he's convicted of that. And he is eventually executed at the ripe old age of 21 years old on March 17th, 1896, excuse me. He was number 77 of 86 executed. So that picture I showed you of the drawing of the executed, that was him on the gallows. And sadly, to kind of give you an idea of how brave these guys are, number 4 and number 5, the Crittenden brothers, on Bill's right, our left, they are killed in the line of duty. And Ike Rogers is sadly a year later killed by Cherokee Bill's little brother out of revenge over in Wagner, Oklahoma. So 4 out of the 6 people in this image die violent deaths, 3 of which are deputy U.S. Marshals. Bill's executed with the other 3 down the line of duty. So now that we're talking about brave guys, let's talk about the deputies. So let me go ahead and say this first, and we're obviously talking about Rooster. Rooster Cogburn, you are not kin to him. I say that. I've worked for the Park Service here for 17 years, and not an exaggeration, I've probably met 50 or more Rooster Cogburn descendants. He is a made-up book character, and you got to bust that bubble gently. You'll make people mad at you when you tell them. He's not real. He was an amalgamation of characters. Charles Portis said in his writing to the park, he pulled that name out of a hat. So if you want to know where we got that, and people are like, well, my grandma said he's kin to us on my mom's side. I'm like, oh, your grandma's a liar. That's too bad. But you don't want to hurt, like I said, you got to be careful. Don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So Rooster Cogburn, And like I said, here in a minute, we can argue which one was better. I like both characters from different ways. I love that. I can hit a gnat's eye at 90 yards, says a Rooster. But yeah, I mean, he's the man in this, right? He's well armed. He would have been a gunfighter, basically a guerrilla soldier. Great example of how tough these deputies would have been, but not a real character. So no, not a real person, but who they would have based off of, and what Charles Portis would have known at the time would have perhaps helped kind of made him an amalgamation character. So we do have writings to Charles Portis. After the movie came out, the superintendent here at the park wrote a letter to Portis, who was very reclusive. To my knowledge, he never did any public meetings. He never did any public talks or shows. He wrote the book. He was on this scene a lot for the original John Wayne version. He actually was there at the movie scene, filming quite a bit. But there, he says in the writing back to our superintendent, he pulled the name Brewster Cogburn out of a hat. Originally, he was going to have it as Reuben, which is kind of thing, or excuse me, it was going to be Reuben Cockburn, like a cock, like a fighting bird, right? And he said he wanted to make it like a plucky kind of tough, small character. And and I love that line in there where he says, well, my, baby sister, my wall may droop a little bit, but I can still outcrow anything in the barnyard. And that's kind of the perfect example of who he was. He was this tough as nails, grit filled guy that would have, been like this over the top kind of character. But again, who he might have been an amalgamation of is kind of neat. So I'll give you some of the people that we might have think that he might have been based off of. So these are real pictures of real deputy marshals. Joe Cheeseman on the right. You got the top list there. These guys are the guys who actually brought in Ned Christie. The bottom picture there is after some African-American deputies on the one on the left and the two on the right. Bob Fortune, a couple others. Amazing characters. Deputy marshals on average are paid about $2 per arrest. That's it. On average, a year, these deputy marshals only make about $500 a year. Now, to us in modern inflation, that's about 12 to 15 grand. That's it. So these deputies are not making much of money. So when a young girl comes up to Rooster Cogburn in his little Chinese grocery and says, I'll give you $50 right now, that's big money for him. That's 25 arrests. And that's without all the mileage of capturing 25 separate guys. And so these guys get paid, they're per arrest. They're getting paid per mileage, 6 cents a mile going somewhere, 10 cents a mile coming back. And they're also getting paid for the subpoenas they serve. So for subpoenas, 50 cents for subpoena. And so these guys are not getting paid much money. So again, Rooster would have been jumping at the thought of having that much money offered to him. So one thing that is fiction, though, LaBeef. He's not working. He has no jurisdiction inside Indian Territory. And so I love the Texas Rangers, but he shouldn't be working inside Oklahoma. And I love that quote, LaBeef, you get crossways of me and you'll think 1,000 brick could fall on you. Wish that you were back at the Alamo with Travis. Like I said to some of you before, I'm convinced that the book True Grit is actually an anti-Texas propaganda pamphlet. Charles Portis rags on Texas a lot in this book. LaBeef's a great character and a really neat person. I thought Matt Damon did a great job. And I love Glenn Campbell music. I'm not sure Glenn Campbell was the best person to play him. He maybe not as good as actor as he was a singer, but I thought Matt Damon did a great job in the movie of him. His horse looked right. And remember he asked him about his horse and that he said, and because he's riding a little Mustang, and a little Mustang horse would be super tiny. I've actually trained Mustangs before, and they're typically not very big horses. And he gives that line and say, how long y'all been mounted on sheep down there in Texas? In other words, saying how long you riding tiny little horses down there. And of course, LaBeef's response was, well, don't you worry he said, my little Appaloosa will still be running when your big American stud is winded and collapsed. And which may have been true at that point. So LaBeef, unless he's on his own, he is not working as a Texas Ranger at that point. However, some of the people that he might have been based off of, like Rooster Cogburn, guys like I say, what the heck? These are two of my favorite deputies. If that doesn't make me sound like Woody from Toy Story, this is Heck Thomas on the left, and Heck Bruner on the right. Heck Thomas is born 1850. He actually would have met Robert E. Lee during the Civil War. His family's from Georgia. He worked in Atlanta. He's a lifelong law enforcement officer. He becomes a deputy U.S. Marshal in 1889. He personally shoots and kills Bill Doolin. You might recognize that name, the Doolin Gang. He personally kills Bill Doolin. He's there trying to capture the Daltons before they go to the Coffeyville raid there in Kansas. And he's one of the 3 guardsmen. They made movies about him and all kind of stuff. At the time, he actually made movies about himself. But he holds our record for the largest arrest record ever made at one single time. He brings in 42 prisoners at one time, in one setting, and makes our record. That's Heck Thomas, which a lot of people say, well, did they name their kids Heck? I did not know this for the longest time. Heck is a shortened version of Henry. Kind of like Willie for William, or Bill, for William. That's Heck is short for Henry. The other guy there on the right, that's Heck Bruner, well-known a guy at the Fort Smith jail, but he would have been Heck Bruner is born in 59, becomes a deputy, and when he's 30, at 31, 1890, multiple shootouts. Remember the Cherokee Bill shootout when he tries to break out of the jail, shoots that guard? Oh, Heck Bruner's there. Heck Bruner's got a lever action shotgun and starts firing down the hallway there, and he stops the escape attempt basically by himself. Awesome character. One of my favorite stories. Now, y'all know Kevin Costner. I'm going to brag for just a second. He came through a few years ago, and I got to give him a tour, which is pretty stinking cool. And I told him this story, and he laughed. That Heck Bruner once arrested a guy, was trying to arrest him. The guy was on a horse. The guy shot Bruner, and the guy turned his horse and took off running, and Bruner draws that Colt revolver you can see stuck in his pants there, that ivory-handled Colt, fires one round at him, hits him through the hat brim, fires a second round at him, hits that guy on the back, goes through his spine, exits his chest, and hits the horse in the head and kills the horse and the guy right there on the spot. And he says he always felt bad about shooting that horse. Great joke. Costner thought that was hilarious. So guys like that, and later, well, sadly, a little follow up on that, Bruner actually lives until 1897, and then 1899, excuse me, and he tries to swim a flooded river because the ferry was on the other side. He's like, I can make it, and he swam across and drowned in 1899. And then when they found his body, his pockets were full of warrants out for an arrest. I'm convinced that God had to kill the man because nobody else could, because he was that tough. But people like that, Rooster Cogburn, yes, Rooster's a made-up character, but other people like him would have been real. And some of the ones we also might think of, y'all might recognize the guy there on the left. That's Bass Reeves, well-known deputy marshal, one of the few, probably a couple dozen. I think we're up in the 20s now of black deputy marshals that worked at Fort Smith. That would have made himself very wealthy working at Fort Smith. One of our best stories. Zeke Proctor there in the center caused one of the greatest shootouts of deputy marshal history, where he shoots somebody else, accidental shooting of his girlfriend, Polly Beck. They try him there in the Cherokee Nation. Some of the deputy U.S. Marshals in 1872 aren't happy about this, mostly because they have ties to Cherokees. They go in what we call the Going Snake Massacre, where 3 Cherokees on Zeke's sides there dead, 1 deputy marshal, 4 posse members, and 3 other Cherokees are all dead. It was the worst loss of life in U.S. Marshal Service history, and he caused it. And here's what's funny. He then later becomes a deputy U.S. Marshal. And so he's Cherokee. So you got African-American marshals, Cherokee marshals, and then you got the guy on the right. Y'all have heard of the Daltons, right? Coffeyville raid and all that stuff, right? Would you be surprised to know that 3 of the Dalton brothers worked as deputy marshals at Fort Smith, Arkansas? The oldest one you see pictured here, this is Frank Dalton. He died in the line of duty, was killed in the line of duty. His brothers Grat and Emmett also work as deputy marshals at Fort Smith. And so you've got everybody from like Bass Reeves, like a super good guy. You've got Zeke Proctor, who caused some loss of life, questionable good guy. You've got the Daltons over here, which turn out to be hard, bad guys later. And so Rooster being this kind of rough, tough character that would have, kind of skirted the law in some cases is pretty true. And one of my favorite stories here, I'll kind of connect back in here, would have been this guy, Addison Beck. If you see this picture here, Addison, I know it's hard to read that picture, but he's a deputy marshal, and he lost money on his trip. He didn't get paid much. I'll read that to you. I lost money on this. This is a letter to his wife. I don't know when I will get any money. I think the men in their bowls will make money. I've asked Dale here to have one of them cans of alcohol, 4.5 gallons, and Dale became highly insulted. Which, other words, what he's doing, he didn't have any money, so he was asking the U.S. Marshal that he worked for to have 4.5 gallons of that liquor to sell it to make money. The evidence that he had taken from outlaws. That's illegal. You can't do that. So there's a reason that Valentine Dell, who's a U.S. Marshal, became highly insulted. Well, yeah, you asked your boss to get illegal alcohol and sell it. So not a good idea. But then you got people like who is Rooster? I love that. He rode for Quantrill. He rode for Parker. One of my favorite lines in the new movie is you see Rooster asking LaBeef, well, who'd you serve under? He said, well, I served under, Wheeler. He's like, I don't have to hang my head when I say it. And then he said, you rode with Light of the Moon with Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson. That's Quantrill pictured there. These are the guys who burnt Lawrence. And he says that, he's like, you burnt, sacked Lawrence and killed women and children. And Rooster's response was, that's lies. Them men was patriots, Texas trash, which is a great line. But that's who he would have, at the time, that's the kind of rough, tough character that he would have been with. Do we have Confederates working as U.S. Marshals? Absolutely. I have Confederates that are U.S. Marshals, the head U.S. Marshals, not a deputy, the U.S. Marshals that are Confederates. And guys in the Union, we have bushwhackers, all kind of people that would have done this. So that kind of makes sense how he would have fought would have been like this. You can see him. This is the Quantrill's guys. The guys on the left there, that's Bill Maddox. And the bottom right there is William Gregg. They would have fought at Prairie Grove down here in Arkansas. They would have been at the Lawrence raid. Top right there was Dave Poole. He was up at the massacre of Centralia, where they said he was jumping body to body to count how many they killed. I mean, that's the kind of rough people the guerrillas were. Some people consider them patriots, I guess, if you were in Missouri. like Brewster said, them men was patriots. But there's others, most of the other rest of the nation thought they were terrorists. And so you've got kind of this back and forth, but that's the kind of rough characters that they would have been. And you do see them shooting a lot and charging a lot and fighting a lot with pistols, which makes sense why you're going to see Rooster there later use those two cool Navy sixes. So which is one of my favorite. I'm not going to go through the full thing in here because we're coming to the end of our time. But the Guns of True Grit, I love that picture of them. Now, again, I love the original John Wayne version when he's twirling that Winchester. I'll be honest, if you said, Cody, give me one image that's the most American thing you've ever seen in your life, it'd probably be Rooster Cogburn, John Wayne, twirling a Winchester, charging bad guys. But if you want to go by the book, then it's these two Colt revolvers that Jeff Bridges is using in the second movie and what is used in the book, which he has those. Remember seeing on the picture up there, you saw that guy with the horse there in the center of that painting, and you could see those little saddle holsters that he'd been carrying. He keeps those too, which I think is funny. Remember, he's a Quantrill's bushwhacker. What's he used to doing? Fight with pistols. And those pistols in late 1870s are antiquated compared to the gun that's on his hip. But he's used to fighting with guns like that. And so what I love about this end scene, and what I think is probably arguably one of the greatest, Western scenes ever written and then shot, is within about less than a 3-4 minute time span, you get 3 redemption stories. You get Rooster, who says he's tough and rough, and I rode with these men, and you get one of the best lines of the whole movie, and both of them, and in the book. Remember when he says he's talking to Maddie, and he says, when she said, well, what did you do before you became a deputy? He said, well, I robbed a high interest bank in New Mexico. And they said, well, and she goes, well, it doesn't matter. You're still stealing. And he says, well, that's the position the New Mexicans took. I had to flee for my life. And then what does he say? He said, I waited that posse thinned out, and I turned old Bo around, and I taking them reins on my mouth, firing 2 Navy sixes. And he said, they must have been all married men who loved their families because they turned to run to home. And which I think, and if you look, I can read about when John Wayne got the Oscar for the movie, they said that line and that scene is what they gave him the Oscar for. And then sadly enough, the second movie blows right over it, but it is original from the book. And so there's him firing his 2 Navy sixes, charging them, If you're coming down on men hard enough, they're not thinking about who's the right and their left. They're thinking about how they can get out of that and the hurt that's about to come down on them. And that's right. And you see that him kind of doing that in the second movie and in the book, him charging the 2 Navy sixes. And so again, that redemption story, he is as tough as he says he is. He is as good and with a gun as he says he was. And the fact that he fought through the war is one thing, but now he's charging 4 very well-armed men, and he's doing it with 2 guns that he would have used when he was a much younger man. And you get him fighting back and basically winning. He redeemed himself there at the end. So there's redemption story number 1. There's this picture of his other gun that you would have seen him carry, his Colt 73 Peacemaker, which are another great anti-Texas line. Remember when he's whooping Maddie, LaBeef is, and he says he's whooping her, and he says, he said, well, I'll finish when I start. And Rooster Cogburn goes, you do, and it'll be the biggest mistake you ever made, you Texas brush popper. Again, very anti-Texas, but he pulls that gun's out on his hip. That's a good, modern, reliable handgun. It's a cartridge gun compared to the 2 guns that are on his his holsters, his old Civil War guns that he would have carried. So you get redemption story number 1 on there. But then you also some of the other guns compared from a good guy to a bad guy. You get the 73 or the little. I love this that they included this in the movie. If you look, you got Lucky Ned Pepper and the gun they gave him, which I think is perfect for his character. That model gun is called the Outlaw model. And he's carried by an outlaw. If you look at the grip on his pistol holster there, or excuse me, on his grip on his gun, it's got a clover leaf. Oh, Lucky Ned. All his luck run out that day. Redemption story number 1 would have been Rooster. Redemption story number 2 would have been, of course, LaBeef with his cow lick showing there in the front, firing all that round. Remember, Rooster makes fun of him, doesn't he? He says, oh, you can't hit anything at that far, whatever. And he says, Sharp's rifle is a mighty gun at a distance. Think about where he's from, Texas, long distance shooting, big open areas. And no. And what does he do? He takes that shot and saves Rooster with the exact same skills that, Rooster scoffed at him for earlier in the book. And with that single shot in a rifle that would have been terrible at an up close gunfight for speed, because it's a single shot gun. You have to load 1 shot at a time. But at a distance, LaBeef was right. It's a good gun. You got that amazing kind of redemption story there with LaBeef. And then, of course, Maddie there. There you go, with her pistol. So what I love about this image, 1, great line. He said, by God, girl, that's a Colt's Dragoon. That big old heavy pistol. That's almost 4 pounds of pistol, by the way, that she got from her daddy. And he puts it on, her shoulder there. He's like, well, it'd be fine if you find a fence post to lean it off of, and which is right. That's a lot of gun. But what's neat about this, and I couldn't find an image for it. I guess I could take a screenshot of the movie sometime. But there's no image of this. And I think one of the best scenes of the whole movie is there at the end or the beginning when she first gets her daddy's stuff. You remember that scene? And in the John Wayne version, I think they did this better. In the book too. She gets that gun out and all his stuff, and that's her daddy's stuff. This old Colt's Dragoon. Too big of a gun for her, but that was her daddy's. And you see that she holds that gun and she hugs it. Yes, that's not her dad, but that represents something that was his. And so she uses that gun and says, I'm going to fight back and I'm going to eventually get you. Now, she doesn't shoot him with that gun, but she does shoot Cheney, doesn't she? And she redeems herself. She sets out and finishes just what she said. Rooster, just as tough as he says he was. LaBeef, just as tough as he says he was. Maddie Ross, just as tough as she said she was. And so you get all those redemptive arcs in the storyline connecting on that last scene where Rooster charges the bad guys. LaBeef saves him with that long shot, and then Maddie shoots Cheney and avenges her father. So you get that amazing stuff in there. And so my last 2 slides here. So arguably, again, we focus so much on Rooster. Like I said, that was my favorite part of the story in a lot of ways. But you get these characters. So who had the most grit? Was it Rooster? With all his background story and his redemptive arc to saving this girl and becoming lifelong friends with her, even though he never sees her again. Was it LaBeef who left home comes up and in the book doesn't die, right? And the second movie doesn't either, when the first one dies, but saves them twice for that matter. And John Wayne said even once after he was dead, after he got hit on the head. Or is it Charles Portis who brought all these characters together and made real life images of them that here we are, decades later, still discussing, still talking about, still fleshing out, and not just a fake story. Yes, LaBeef, Maddie, Rooster, all made up characters, but the people they're based upon are real. And I'll share this one last final story and I'm done. In the letter that Charles Portis wrote to the park, he comments on it that he said that the author there, the director, he said, well, we're going to film this in Colorado. And Portis there argued against that. He said, this is not a big sky Western. And he said, the director said, it doesn't matter. He said, all Westerns are fairy tales. And Portis disagreed with that. And so do I. Yes, the characters in the story are not real, but the places and the things that he based them off of were. And so the setting of the lawless, almost Indian Territory land, the criminals and the men and the women who brought them to justice and saved this country and the people from lawlessness and crime and disorder, who changed an entire state, who, changed arguably, decades of life and sped up statehood and for right or wrong, depending on what you will go with the tribe. But these heroes and heroines, do we have villains here? Absolutely. Do we have heroes here? Absolutely. They may not be John Wayne or Jeff Bridges. They may not be Matt Damon, or Gun Campbell. They may not be, Haley Steinfeld or Kim Darby. They may be, the people that actually represented and who they actually were that brought this story to life, this real life story. And then Portis puts it into something we can all kind of take into a story and then delve into and talk about, like I said, decades later. And so I am done. That is my last slide. There you go. At the end. Come see a fat old man sometime as he jumps on his horse and over the fence. I'll stop sharing here so I can see you guys and maybe we can talk for a minute here. But anyways, there you are. I can see you again. Thank you guys. Sorry about the little blip in the PowerPoint slideshow there. I apologize for that, but it doesn't surprise me. If you met any of the other park rangers in here, they'd say I'm the last one you want doing anything technology. I can break horses and I can shoot your cannons. But if you want me to, you're wrong, cowboy. So anyways, with that, I'm done. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'll open it up for questions or comments. Please ask me anything you want. If I don't know the answer, I'll just lie to you. We can have a good story with it. Yes, sir.
My least favorite character is, I read the book long enough ago, I don't remember. The brother who cackles and makes all the animal noises. What's the purpose of him? I mean, he's ridiculous.
He is.
Maybe to show a brother's loyalty? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wish I could give a better explanation of that. Every time I've shown that movie to people, and like my wife and I have watched it. She'd never. My wife's from Hawaii. I met her through the National Park Service, actually. So when I got her to see that movie, she was like, "What is he doing? Why is he doing that?" And you're right. It doesn't make much sense. I wish I could say, "Well, this historical character do that." The only thing I can think of, and again, this may be a character in Charles Portis's mind that he might have met when he was a kid, for all I know. But I do know, not the turkey or not the chicken thing, or I think he does cow and he does sheep. He does a few different animals, and the rooster. But in one part, he does. I know when Cherokee Bill, I mentioned the guy who tried to break out of the jail. When he does that, they actually question the original transcript, and we got to read it during the trial. But he was gobbling like a turkey, and that was apparently a Cherokee war cry. They even brought that up historically in the federal trial. They said, "Well, was he gobbling?" And they're like, "Yeah." What did it sound like? Well, like a turkey, And he was doing this because it was basically meant I'm going to fight to the death. So I have no idea. That's the closest animal comparison I can come to. You're right. He's a weird character in there. And when he got shot, I was not upset. In the movie, you're like, yeah, finally, that guy's kind of a weirdo. Yeah, and then compared to the book and the second movie, you have like Mexican Bob, or what he calls him, Mexican, and that character doesn't exist in some of the other stuff, and then the doctor, which existed in the book, and you see him in the second movie. The book the second movie is much closer to the book. And a lot of people like that. at the end, you see Maddie there missing her arm, and she's an older lady talking about meeting with him and stuff like that. So a lot of people enjoy the second movie better. I love it for the historical accuracy, the clothes and the guns and the tack and the horse gear and stuff. But overall, I mean, really both movies are pretty good. But how Portis writes it, again, that he tried to base it on certain aspects of reality. It wasn't just like, I mean, you can't see it here, but I've got all my Louis Lamar books lined up. You're in my study. We're actively awaiting for the zombie apocalypse. That's why all the weapons are back. But like I have all my, and I love Louis Lamar books, but mostly Louis Lamar is based off of what he can create, which is amazing as a writer. But Portis is pulling real life characters. If you watch the movie again in the second movie and the book, when they're at the gallows scene, for example, and they're saying, "We have any final words?" And in the second movie, it captures it great. Again, the book does. He says, they get to that one guy and he says, and it's perfect English. He says, "I shot the wrong man," is the which of why I'm here, which is exactly historically accurate to what of the prisoners that got executed said. He literally said those exact words. And so the Coen brothers actually got it in the movie, and then Portis wrote it up as that, which the Coen brothers did actually come down and visit the park and managed to get the one ranger who didn't know who they were, which I'm horrified by. Because I would have probably pulled a gun on them and then been like, "You will film this movie here. You're not going back to Hollywood." But they and that ranger had neither even seen the original True Grit, and I'm just like, "Oh, why?" But anyways, no. So again, that's so I kind of got off subject there, but that's the closest I can come up to it as the only animal sound during a fight that I can think of is the Cherokee Bill turkey gobble. Where Portis added that to the story, I have no idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else, guys? Like I said, I highly encourage you to watch the movies too. There's little scenes that both of them write that's extra. Let's see, in the second one, the bear character, I think he calls himself Forrester. He rides up, not in the book. Very kind of an odd, very Coen-esque kind of character. This weird dude in a big bear, coat comes up and offers to sell a dead body to him and pull teeth and stuff. It's very strange. It's a very odd and that's where you do hear the word Mexican Bob thrown in there when he's like, "That guy's house," or Greaser Bob. He called him Greaser Bob. And you're like, okay, whatever. But anyway, so there's a lot in both movies that are excellent. There's a lot in both in the actual in the book that's just fantastic. If you haven't read it, and I would imagine most of you have, but if you haven't, highly encourage you to read it. It's an excellent book. And like I said, based on a lot of reality and actually what happened down here. So anyhow, with that, anything else, guys?
How long was Fort Smith an actual functioning fort? I think you said it started in 1817.
Yes, it was. The first fort was 1817 to 1824. Then the military left to go build Fort Gibson. So they're going to abandon Fort Smith, go build Fort Gibson. And then because of the removal process and the Trail of Tears, they're going to come back and really start building. The first buildings built into the second Fort Smith around 1838. And then it's going to be as a military garrison until 1871. And so the following year in 72, that's when the court system moves from Van Buren across the river, comes over, and they're going to turn, they've got this big vacant government building. You've got a giant wall around it, perfect. And this building, they're going to turn the jail and then the courtroom. And it just worked out perfect for what they needed. And then that was there up until 1896 for the court system. So 1817, 1824, then 1838 to 1871. So pretty.
Thank you.
You bet. Yeah. One of the reasons I love Fort Smith and I love working there is I never feel like I'm narrowed down to one little date or two. It's not just like one battle on a date. We cover roughly about 80 years of Fort Smith. And so it's super fun. We can talk about the early tribes that predate the fort all the way to the War of 1812, the removal process and the survival stories of the tribes, the Mexican War, the Gold Rush, the Civil War on both sides at Fort Smith, and then get all the fun cowboy stuff afterwards. That I can just argue to my wife, "Hey, listen, I need to buy this gun. It's for education for children, it's for the kids." So try to merit that. That usually doesn't work, but anyways, but yeah, there's a lot of cool stories. So I can see now. How many of you have ever been to Fort Smith? Has anybody been down there before? Oh, well, you'll have to come see me. It's a free museum to go through. The National Park Service finally made it free, so we don't charge to go through. We're open 7 days a week, 9 to 5. Come see me down there. I'll show you around all the buildings and the artifacts and museums and stuff. 2 huge floors of museum items and a lot of the grounds. You can see the remnants of the first fort. The visitor center, that big stone building I showed you there, or brick building, is still open for the visitor center, have our offices in it and stuff. And then the grounds, the commissary building, the gallows have been rebuilt. They still stand out there. So there's a lot of cool things to see. And then in Fort Smith, you've got multiple museums, the Fourth Museum of History, the Clayton House, Miss Laura's, which is one of the only bordellos in the National Registry, is one of our museums in our town. I mean, that's and then you've got the new U.S. Marshals Museum, which just opened last year. So that's a $36 million museum that's about a quarter of a mile away from us there. Mark. So you come to Fort Smith if you like reading. We have an amazing library. It's gigantic. It's huge. So if you want to come read, see the stuff, awesome. Good places to go eat, but also tons of historic sites to go visit. So if you're interested in that time period of history, it's worth a couple days stay to just go hit all the museums in the town and top-notch stuff. I'd put us up against most other large towns that are much larger than us as far as the historic sites and stuff goes. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you again.
Thank you guys for
Cody.
coming out. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. All right. Oh, thanks, guys. Thank you all. We'll catch you next time. Hopefully we'll come see you. I'll log off here. Thank you again, guys. We'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
If you have your scavenger hunt, Salina Reed scavenger hunt with you, and you need a stamp on it for one of your programs attended, I can take care of that right now. If you don't have a scavenger hunt and you would like one, there are some scattered around the tables. And if you didn't yet get a copy of True Grit, I did bring some in that you can take one if you would like. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, man.
All right, and yeah, just write the fact or fiction or something along that lines. No, yeah, the book is no charge whatsoever. Yeah, we're giving away free copies as a part of Salina Reed.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hello, Chris.
Hi, Dad. How are you?
I need a stamp,
I'll
please.
get you a stamp.
Yes.
And yeah, just write fact or fiction or
Awesome.
something like
Thank
that.
you.
Okay. Put your stamp there.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good night, Christy.
I finally got signed up for coloring again, so I'm excited.
Good. Okay, here we go.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Where is stuff?
All right, so a lot of it can be found on our website, on
Oh.
the Liner Reads page. The videos all have links there.
Like this?
Yeah, the map is actually just outside this room on the little pedestal there. The exhibit is out there amongst the stacks that's on loan to us from the museum. And then the digital archive is once again on our website. If you'd like, I can get stamp, part of it is coming to 2 programs as part of it. So if you'd like, I can give you a little stamp there that shows you came. If you do end up finishing it up.
Isn't this thing, are the agencies like the map online also?
Yes, the map is also online. Everything should be available on the website. We wanted to make it pretty easy to find, but some of it is here in the library if you'd like to see.
Since I've been.
Question for you. At Salina Art Cinema, there's gonna be a showing of True Grit. Which version?
It's the second version, the newer
Second
version. Yes,
Okay.
so what he said was the more historically accurate version.
The one that feels more like reading the book.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
How much is the cost of that?